Stop streaming button.
My name is David Kenny. I'm the preacher for the Wadsworth Church of Christ on Westwood Avenue. Glad you could be with us on the program today. We're talking about the subject of apologetics, and we've mentioned the definition of this term a couple times already, but it'd be good just to keep it in front of us. Apologetics is a defense. It comes from the word that we get our word apology from, but it's not making an apology for the Bible, but defending the Bible. And if you look at the dictionary, you'll see that there's multiple definitions for that term, apology. Apologetics has to do with the defense of things, matter, whatever the subject may be. In our particular area, what we're looking at is proofs for the inspiration in the Bible. What are our arguments to sustain that the Bible is the Word of God? One of the areas that we're looking at today is the accurate historical record. And we talked last time about the Hittites, and if you recall from that program, we discussed the idea that people at one point in time they disputed whether the Hittites actually existed, and the Bible records the Hittites several times in the Bible. So you can see the importance of archaeologists being able to find that empire, and they did. And they found out they were a huge empire, a lot larger than the United States, lasted a lot longer anyway than our country. And you wonder, well, why were these critics criticizing the Bible so much? And that's an important reminder to us. There's always going to be people out there who have criticisms. And an honest investigation is fine. There's no problem with that at all. But some people move from one thing to another, to another, to another to criticize. And we need to keep in mind that critics are that way, and that we need to take a look at the evidence and make a decision ourselves. And that's what we're doing in this program. Take a look at our argument that we're making about the inspiration of the Bible. Number one, if it's the case that the Bible is historically accurate and unbiased in every detail, even details that modern history questioned at one time, then the Bible is a historical record beyond peer and authored by one beyond peer, in other words, God. And then number two, it is the case that the Bible is historically accurate and it's unbiased, even revealing details that modern history had questioned at one time. Remember the Hittites. We'll look at other examples of that. Therefore, the Bible is the work of a historian beyond peer, and that person is God. And we talk about historical records and things like that, and we talk about history books, and we realize that there's a lot of bias in things that are reported. There's a slogan that whoever wins the war gets to write the historical record, and there's a lot of truth to that. And we always have to measure and weigh how much bias there is in a given historical document. And that's true in the Bible as well. The Bible has proven itself to be unbiased, and one of the ways it does that is it reveals details that, we really don't necessarily want to know that information. The Bible still tells us. For example, we teach our children the great significance of David, the shepherd boy, and we talk about his confrontation with Goliath. But the Bible also tells us that when he became king, he committed adultery with Bathsheba, murdered her husband Uriah, and took his wife from him. That was a heinous crime, and the Bible doesn't cover that up. And there's numerous examples like that. The Bible doesn't spare its heroes. That goes to bias. The Bible is an unbiased record. And that goes to reliability. And look at this quote. We had it up here before, but let's take a look at it again from Dwayne Bryant. And this is what he says: if archaeology is to speak to the inspiration of the Bible, then it must do so by showing its reliability. After all, if Scripture can be shown to be unreliable, then it cannot be inspired of God, for a perfect God cannot direct his authors to make mistakes. Factual correctness is a benchmark of biblical inspiration. If the text is truly God-breathed, 2 Timothy 3:16, then it will be free of error. And that's important to note, and that's important to remember, because a lot of, you want a text that's reliable. If the Bible is telling you, read, study, apply your life at it, and this is the rewards. Well, if you can't rely on those words, then how much faith are you going to be able to have in what God is telling you? So it's very important that we have a reliable book, and the Bible certainly passes that test. And today we're going to look at another example. This example relates to something that's called the Moabite Stone. The Moabite Stone is in the Louvre Museum in Paris, France. And here's a picture of it. And you can read that quote I have there with you. But just a little bit of background about this stone. It was discovered in 1868 by a German missionary named F.A. Klein, who heard reports of this stone and he sought to confirm its existence. So he goes out to look for it. He finds it 20 miles east of the Dead Sea at a place called Diamond. And this is in modern Jordan. And this is an area that was known to be inhabited by a group called the Moabites. And this stone is made of a bluish basalt stone. It's about 4 feet high, 2 feet wide, and about 14 inches thick. And it contains 39 lines of writing. And it's believed to have been made around 830 BC. Now, the Moabite stone is also called the Mesha stone, or the Mesha stela, after King Mesha of Moab. And if you look at the passage there in 2 Kings 3, 4 through 5, it says, "Now Mesha, king of Moab, was a sheep breeder, and he regularly paid the king of Israel 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams. But it happened when Ahab died that King Moab rebelled against the king of Israel." Well, what's written on that stone that we have there is the account, the Moabite account of this event. Now, the question is, how much information is there? I mean, there's 39 lines of writing. And this is actually the second time I've recorded this program, because the first time I read it, and it was like, even though it was 39 lines, it seemed like it's really difficult to read. But it's impressive about how much information this stone has that corresponds to the Bible. And we'll take a look at that in just a second. But let's just back up for a second and take a look at the question, who were the Moabites? Yeah, that's important for us to remember. The New King James cites 181 occurrences of the term Moab or Moabite or Moabites. And another thing to keep in mind too, so you have this name all over the place. You'd like to find some kind of corresponding evidence outside of the Bible to prove it. But we talked about bias too, and one of the things that we need to keep in mind is, how did the Moabites come about? Well, the Moab was his name. He was a child of Lot and his older daughter, Genesis 19:30 through 38. Abraham then would have been Moab's great uncle. And you can read about the account of the establishment of the Moabites in Genesis chapter 19:30 through 38. And the Bible tells you, it doesn't hide it up. It doesn't hide it. It doesn't overlook it. It tells you, rather just matter-of-factly, that Lot's two daughters slept with him, got him drunk, slept with him, and they had two children. And one of them was Moab, and the other one was Ammon. And those became the nations of the Moabites and the Ammonites. And the Bible tells you about that. I mean, as uncomfortable as that sounds, it doesn't cover it up. That goes to it being an unbiased account. And that's important that we note that as we go through. And the Israelites and the Moabites, even though they were related through Lot and Abraham, they would have sort of a tense relationship at times. Sometimes they would get along, sometimes they would fight. And there's some interesting people who came from this nation. And one of those people is a lady by the name of Ruth. Now, Ruth, which is the name of the book in the Old Testament, Ruth married Boaz, and Ruth was a Moabite. And it's important to note that because her and Boaz would give birth to Obed. And Obed was the father of Jesse. And Jesse was the father of King David. So Ruth is David's great-grandmother. And that's important to note that. And it's also interesting to note that she was a part of the genealogy of Christ in Matthew 1 and verse 5. So you have all this information about these people called the Moabites, and you wondered, is there any evidence of them outside of the Bible? And let me encourage you, parents. I brought in a picture of in a previous show, I brought in a picture of my high school history book. And I looked the Moabite stone up. It wasn't in there. Parents, you're the one that's going to have to tell your children about the Moabite stone. The Rosetta Stone was in there, and that's very important. But there's no record about the Moabite stone. I mean, obviously they can't fit everything in a history book. And you have to keep in mind, parents, you're going to have to explain some of these things to your children. If you want them to believe that the Bible is an accurate historical record based on evidence, you're going to have to show them that evidence. And the Moabite Stone was a significant discovery. It's still very significant. I mean, they just don't put things in a museum in Paris, France for no reason. And so we need to keep that in mind as parents, that we explain these things to our children. You can't rely on the public school system to give them this information. Sometimes they're not allowed to, with the political correctness of our society. Parents, you have to do that. Don't neglect that. But let's take a look at the slide. And what I did, I jotted down on a slide that the Moabite Stone confirms the Bible. In that, just those few brief lines on the Moabite Stone, look at the things that it mentions. It mentions people and places and events. And look, I put the scriptural citation there for you to look at. Like, for example, this rebellion against the kingdom of Israel that's recorded in 2 Kings chapters 1 through chapter 3. That's what the Moabite Stone's about. That's what it's talking about. It confirms that event. It also talks about several people. It names them by name and also their positions in one way or another. Like Omri, the king of Israel. That was Ahab's father. After him came Ahab. He was the son of King Omri. 1 Kings 16:28. His name is on that stone in that position. Also people of Gad, one of the tribes of Israel, are mentioned. Numbers 1:24. And not only that, but several cities are named on the Moabite Stone that this king claims that he built, and probably did. But he names these cities. And I'm not going to name them all. I have them listed right there for you in the scriptures. But every one of those names of those cities are in the Bible. And those are the passages that are there. So, this Moabite Stone confirms that these cities existed, cities which the Bible records. So it's historically accurate. Also interesting, the Moabites were idolaters. And the Moabite Stone reveals that. It keeps talking about, I did this to please Chemosh, or Chemosh was angry, and Chemosh helped us. And you may not know who Chemosh is, but Chemosh was their national god, their idol. And it's sad, this king who put the Moabite Stone up there, he actually sacrificed his son to Chemosh. Now, I don't mean by sacrificed him in the sense of, he let him go work for him for the summer. No, he killed him. Blood sacrifice. These were the way that the Moabites and the Ammonites were. There is rampant idolatry in Canaan. Archaeologists are finding that all over the place. We like to think, some people like to say, the Canaanites, they were just minding their own business. They were just out picking grain, and they weren't doing anything that would be justifiable for the Israelites to come and push them out of their land. But they were wicked people. They were committing all kinds of things that would just turn people's stomach. And one of the things that they did was sacrifice their children in the fire to their false gods. Chemosh is just one of those false gods. There are others too. Well, the Moabite Stone talks about Chemosh, and it points out that about it. In 2 Kings chapter 3:27, that's the scriptural reference that talks about King Mesha offering his oldest son as a burnt offering. So, keep in mind that idolatry, it wasn't just some little hobby. Some people, they have little statues out in their yard, or they have little figurines they carry around, or they hold them from their dashboard, and they do whatever they want. We're not talking about that kind of stuff. I mean, these people would kill their children for them. They would have orgies, and they would have their wives go and participate in these things. I mean, there's just things that they were doing that we would look at and go, whoa, what do you think you're doing? These are the kinds of people the Moabites were, and the Ammonites and other of the Canaanites. So it's important that we keep that in mind. The Moabite Stone documents the name Yahweh. And that's Yahweh's name is in Exodus chapter 3 through 4. Yahweh is the name for God. You may not be as familiar with the term Yahweh, but you probably have heard the term Jehovah, Well, Jehovah and Yahweh are the same thing. It's just a different way of treating how it appears in the original language. And so that's important to note, because this is one of the earliest written documentations outside of the Bible that we have of the Israelites' God's name. And it mentions it on the Moabite Stone. And then there's one other point. This is just in a short, and the stone's not that large, but this is the information that it has. So you can see how significant it is for archaeological proof of the historical accuracy of the Bible. Another point that it points out on the Moabite Stone, it talks about the house of David. And that's very important too. Critics would say, there's no evidence outside the Bible that there ever was a king named David. There's just no evidence of it. And they would just, build up all this criticism, just stir all these people up. And then when they found the Moabite Stone, they don't want to talk about that anymore. Why? Well, the reason why is because the Moabite Stone mentions the house of David. Now, you could say the Bible made it up, but who made it up on the Moabite Stone? See, that's what we're talking about. The Bible is historically accurate. And let's take a look at, from this Time Magazine article. The print's a little small, so let me read this to you. This is from Time Magazine's cover, Is the Bible Fact or Fiction? This isn't that old of a magazine. And people still ask that question. And in this article, they point out what the significance of the Moabite Stone was. And I'd just like to read just an excerpt from it to you. It says, the skeptics' claim that King David never existed is now hard to defend. Last year, the French scholar André Lemaire reported a related House of David discovery in the Biblical Archaeological Review. His subject was the Mesha Stela, also known as the Moabite Stone. The most extensive inscription ever recorded from ancient Palestine, found in 1868 at the ruins of biblical Dibon and later fractured. The basalt stone wound up in the Louvre, where Lemaire spent 7 years studying it. His conclusion, the phrase House of David appears there as well, as with the Tel Dan fragment. This inscription comes from an enemy of Israel boasting of victory, King Mesha of Moab, who figured in the Bible. Lemaire had to reconstruct a missing letter, decode the wording, but if he's right, there are now 2 9th century references to David's dynasty. So, this is a very significant find, this Moabite stone. Where are the critics at? Where are they at? The ones that, there's no evidence. Well, they found the evidence. They move on to something else. That's what they do. Interesting one. The next example we're going to look at, they talked about two evidences of it. The critics moved on to something else about David. Oh, he existed, but he never made it as far north in his kingdom as Dan. He never got clear up into Dan. He was never there. Well, we'll see in a minute that they were wrong on that too. But before we go, it's no wonder, just to point out, this is the summation of the Moabite stone from one writer. And he makes the point very well. It's the most extensive inscription ever recovered from ancient Palestine. So this isn't just some minor find. So parents, you need to make sure your children understand the Bible is historically accurate. The Moabite stone confirms that. The Bible contains the accounts of real people, real places, real cities, real events, not made up ones. This is the evidence. They should not accept any other book unless it could produce at least the amount of evidence that archaeologists have proven about the Bible. And that's something that we need to explain to them, because there's people out there that will deceive them. They need to look at the evidence. So let's take a look at the next one. The Victory Stela in Tel Dan, about the house of David. This is the other one that I was just mentioning. It's a 9th century basalt inscribed in Arabic in 841 BC. It's believed to have been put up by King Hazael or one of his sons. It confirms the defeat of King Joram and King Uzziah. And it includes the inscription, the House of David. And if you look at the picture there, you can see the stones, and you can see that, I put a picture below it that shows you sort of the pieces of it, because it's broken. The first piece of it was discovered in July 1993, and then 2 additional fragments were found in June 1994. And it was found in Tel Dan in northern Israel, which is clear up by Lebanon and Syria, right there on the border. And it's a 9th century inscription, and it was believed to be made around 841 BC. And it commemorates these events, which, it's important to note that. But what's interesting to note, it talks about the house of David. And he talks about defeating the house of David up in Tel Dan. Well, wait a minute. Now, how could that be if David never made it up there? How could that be? And he talks about the house of David. See, there's evidence clear up there that David's empire, his influence, made it up that far. But the critics say, oh, no, there's no evidence until they found this. They found that in July 1993. That's just, not quite 9 years ago. See, archaeologists are still finding evidence. We are still finding additional pieces of information that confirms the Bible. It's one of the exciting things about archaeology. What can they find? Of course, you can't put too much trust in archaeology because it can't find everything. And that's important for us to know how important this is. But let's take a look at this quote before we go. This is what it says about the importance of this Tel Dan Stela. And this is from a magazine, The Victory Stela in Tel Dan, the House of David. This is an archaeologist's assessment. This is by Dr. Bryant Wood. He wrote a piece in the May 2011 issue of Bible and Spade. And this is what he said. The Tel Dan Stela is extraordinary in that it names 8 biblical kings: Ben-Hadad II, Hazael, Joram, Ahab, Isaiah, Jehoram, David, and Jehu. It was most likely erected following Hazael's defeat of Joram and Isaiah at Ramoth Gilead around 841 BC, 2 Kings 8, 28 through 29. The occasion for breaking of the stele was probably when Jehoash, king of Israel from 798 to 782, recaptured Israelite territory previously taken by Hazael, 2 Kings 13, 24 through 25. It appears that the monument stood in Dan near the city gate for over 4 decades. It was a constant reminder to the Israelites that they were subject to the Armenians. When the tide of political power shifted, the Israelites gained the upper hand, and hated stela was broken into many pieces, some of which was reused as building material. And then notice it goes on, and he says the importance of the Tel Dan Stela lies not in the record of history, because the Bible gives a much fuller account. Its importance rather lies in the fact that it is an independent, contemporary witness to the events of 841 BC and the accuracy of the biblical record. And I put up there a copy of, I think this is the issue that has it, I couldn't quite tell, but this is what Bible and Spade looks like, and I put the website there for you. If you're looking for a very exciting periodical to read about some of the things that are coming out, I encourage you to take a look at Bible and Spade. I've got it for several years, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure you would too. They have a great website there at BibleArchaeology.org. And their focus is demonstrating the historical reliability of the Bible through archaeological research and related apologetics investigation. And so, parents, if you're looking for material to help your child understand that the Bible is historically accurate, this would be a great resource to go to. It has a lot of great information, a lot of great articles. It's a way to help you stay current on what's going on, and it's important that you do that. Before we close, let's take a look at our argument one more time. The argument for the inspiration of the Bible and what we're talking about. Number one, if it's the case that the Bible is historically accurate and unbiased in every detail, even details that modern history questioned at one time, then the Bible is a historical record beyond peer and authored by one beyond peer, in other words, God. It is the case that the Bible is historically accurate and unbiased, even revealing details that modern history had questioned at one point. Therefore, the Bible is the work of a historian beyond peer, and that author is God. So we looked at the example of the Moabites and the Moabite Stone. We looked at the example clear up in Tel Dan, and we talked about all these different people, places, events, things that happened. All these things, we didn't even know about until a very recent amount of time. But before that time, critics would go and say, there was no such person as David, there was no way he was up in this area, the Bible's just made up. There wasn't even a David. David didn't even exist. We can find no evidence outside of the Bible. But archaeologists proved them wrong. And they go on and they criticize other things. But at what point does all this evidence come to bear? At what point do you realize that the Bible is accurate? And let me remind you again, parents, it's very important. It's very important that you teach these things to your children. Do not assume that they are being taught them. That would be a big mistake. Very big mistake. We encourage you, please, to look in these matters, and we appreciate your attention on our program today.